Imagine diving into the deep sea, surrounded by amazing marine life. But suddenly, everything changes, and you're in a battle for survival, facing the challenge of deep sea creatures, thirsting for your blood. Join us in a gripping story where the beauty of the ocean becomes a chilling struggle. This is the Unforgettable St. Croix Wall Dive, a diving disaster which is difficult to digest. November 1996, 3 professional divers were studying the marine life of the Cane Bay Wall while they were diving near St. Croix. A week ago, they had placed some traps. Today, they planned to gather the samples and perform more measurements. With hundreds of dives under their belts, all 3 of these people were seasoned divers. So the 3 of them had a combined experience of almost 1,000 dives. 2 of the men, Brett and Robbie, started collecting samples as soon as they reached the depth of the traps, which is around 220 feet, or 67 meters. While monitoring their depth and time, Rod, the 3rd man, spotted 2 oceanic white-tip sharks swimming far away along the wall. Since the men were seasoned divers, they were completely fond of this. Sighting sharks is a common occurrence when diving in the ocean. These open-water species were exceptionally enormous, measuring about 14 feet in length, and it was unusual to see them so near to land. Thus, the 3 men took a quick break from their labor to snap a few photos. They worked at depth for the allotted 15 minutes or so, and were around halfway through their dive. This indicated that it was time to return to the surface. In their ascent plan, Robbie would go first, followed by Brett and Rod at the top. Robbie, for some unknown reasons, had been breathing a little bit more during the dive. So as they started to rise, his air reading was a little lower than normal. Brett instructed him to proceed to a shallower depth. Then, Brett started to swim as well, and noticed that Robbie was pointing back down to where Rod was, who was still down on the wall. Gazing downward, Brett observed that Rod was entirely encased in silt, resembling a cloud of dust. Brett thought Rod might have had a hose break, letting air shoot up and kicking up silt on the wall. Brett swam back down to see whether he needed any assistance, as this also meant that he might be leaking air and might need some extra. To his surprise, it wasn't a hose at all. As he entered the silt cloud and obtained a closer look, he made a chilling discovery. Rod had a large bite mark on his leg, which Brett realized while he tried to grab and pull him. While he was processing what he was seeing, the shark came in for another attack, putting them both in a dire situation. Struggling desperately, they attempted to strike the shark's gills to ward it off. During this fierce struggle, a second shark entered the scene, gripping on Rod's calf, causing the silt to become blood red. Shortly after, the first shark returned, clamping onto Rod's thigh with renewed aggression, forcefully dragging him. Even though Brett was pulling hard in the opposite direction, the shark was too strong and pulled the 2 of them right over the edge of the drop-off. As they plummeted down the wall, practically in a free fall, both of them struggled fiercely against the sharks while rapidly using up the little air they had left. At a point, Brett checked his depth gauge and noticed it maxed out at 325 feet, indicating they were descending beyond its reading capacity. Finally, a brief pause in the shark's attack allowed Brett to pull them into a small sandy cove within the wall. That was where he finally got a clearer picture of Rod's condition. And to his disbelief, he saw that Rod had nearly severed his entire left leg. He also suffered severe bites to his chest and stomach, and the majority of the tissue was gone. His condition was bad, and they had little time. Every wasted second brought his friend closer to his demise. Upon seeing this, Brett basically went into full panic mode and grabbed Rod and started swimming up as hard as he could. But within just a few seconds, the sharks came back and grabbed Rod again, pulling the both back down the wall. And as if things couldn't get any worse, Brett went to take a breath, and it felt like he was pulling the air through a straw. This meant that he had just a few breaths left before he was completely out of air. Then another second later, the sharks ripped Rod right out of his hands, and Brett watched helplessly as they pulled him deeper into the water. Almost out of air now himself, there was just nothing he could do to help Rod anymore, so he had to refocus on saving himself. Unfortunately, he found himself hovering at nearly 400 feet or below the surface. with scant air remaining. In a panicked frenzy, he began a frantic ascent towards the surface. During this ascent, a glance at his depth gauge revealed a persistent red line at 325 feet. Amidst the overwhelming depth, panic, and the onset of nitrogen narcosis, his singular focus was on executing vigorous, rhythmic kicks toward the faint light above. Stroke after stroke, his vision gradually turned into a tunnel-like perspective. As he swam, this tunnel vision got smaller and smaller until he had one final thought, which was that he was so close and that he passed out about 30 feet from the surface. In a stroke of luck, his buoyancy device retained just enough air to elevate him to the surface, allowing his head to emerge from the water. Then, the pressure difference forced him to exhale and kick-started his breathing, and he woke up gasping for air. Taking a moment to survey his surroundings and grasp the sequence of events, he realized the grim reality. Robbie, the third team member, had already departed to seek assistance. The haunting image of both of them disappearing over the wall, drenched in blood, convinced Robbie to assume the worst and urgently seek help. Emerging from the profound depths, Brett's rapid ascent triggered the onset of decompression sickness. The urgency to reach the shore gripped him, knowing that any delay risked unconsciousness or even paralysis. Reaching shallow waters, he quickly took off his scuba gear and sprinted towards the nearest couple on the beach. In a breathless disclosure, he identified himself and explained his condition: decompression sickness. Urgently, he provided details about his truck, the location of his keys, and the presence of emergency instructions on the dashboard. As he concluded these critical instructions, Brett dropped unconscious once again. Luckily, fate was on his side as fortune favored Brett. The couple he encountered happened to be a doctor and a nurse, well-versed in decompression sickness. Rushing to his truck, they retrieved the instructions and swiftly made their way to a nearby hotel's phone. Because there were no decompression chambers on the island, they notified the marine lab where he worked, and they swiftly dispatched a medevac plane to retrieve him. From there, he was taken from St. Croix and flown to Puerto Rico. In a surreal turn of events, the plane faced an oxygen shortage, necessitating an emergency landing on a highway. The sequence continued with a coordinated helicopter landing to cover the remaining distance to the hospital. Finally admitted, Brett began his journey towards an almost full recovery, with some enduring effects from the decompression sickness. Regrettably, Rod's body has never been recovered. Give this video a thumbs up and comment down below if you enjoyed the video. It will help in boosting our videos in the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe for more disaster videos. We will see you next time.